Hey guys, it's Core Ross, and today we're going to be looking at the game modes you may never have played in Rainbow Six Siege. And we'll start with Attrition. So Attrition was an arcade game mode, and just so you know, an arcade game mode was something smaller than an event, but usually quite interesting. And these would show up every so often. Now we have a dedicated playlist for these in the game, but most of the original arcade stuff actually isn't in there. So what was Attrition? It was actually very much normal Rainbow Six Siege gameplay with one twist, and that was the team that won the round, the operators they were using would then be locked for the rest of the game. So you could imagine this could get quite tactical, because when this was released, which was 2020, there wasn't nearly as many hard breachers in the game as there is today. So it was quite possible that you might play the hard breachers in the first few rounds, use them up, and not be able to play them later in the game. So you might have to think tactically about which operators you wanted to bring. And it was a game mode that I really enjoyed at the time, and the reason for that is most of the time in Siege, you'll see the same operators getting picked over and over and over again. This meant that every single round was very different, and you could see operators you wouldn't normally see getting played together. So it was really quite cool. But also it was undercooked as well because the overall kind of cool strategy elements couldn't really get developed enough in a normal game of Siege. This had to be more rounds, or maybe if you just never switched teams or something like that, it'd be a bit more interesting. But in the normal configuration of rounds, it didn't really have a big enough impact. But it was certainly an interesting game mode, and I do have a video on the channel if you actually want to watch me playing this when it was out. And unfortunately, this was only out between July 9th, 2020 and July 13th, 2020. So basically a long weekend, and that was it for this game mode, and that was the only time it's ever been in the game. And honestly, I would love to see an improved version of Attrition actually replace Pick and Ban in Rainbow Six Siege to just really mix up every single round of rank. Because when it comes to balancing, one of the major problems is that some operators get picked far too much, and they're like, okay, we need to nerf it because this operator's in every single round. But imagine if that just wasn't the case anymore, if we had some sort of Attrition version here. But that would also mean that people would not be able to main characters in ranked, which may be a good or bad thing. Now be noted, in this video this is all about standalone game modes that were not part of events. I've already made a full video going over all the events in Rainbow Six Siege, so you can go check them out and reminisce potentially about the old game modes, or see the ones you maybe never played before. Now let's talk about a game mode called Tactical Realism, and this was added into the game most likely to check a box, and that was in the OG roadmap. They said they were going to add in some game modes, and they didn't really add in game modes at all. So to appease it and just kind of check off the box, they added in Tactical Realism. This was a game mode only available in custom games. It was the only place it ever showed up, and it was taken out in Year 6 Season 1. So it was in the game for some time, and this is how it worked. It was normal Rainbow Six Siege gameplay, but you had a limited HUD, and you also had a more realistic magazine management for ammunition. So this meant if you were reloading your gun, you could lose the bullets, or you'd end up having to go back to a mag later in the game, which was like half full or anything like that. It was kind of cool. And you also had no indication of who was your teammates and who was the enemy, and you had no outlines on teammates as well. So there was a lot of friendly fire when you were playing this in custom games. And you can imagine today, with all the custom cosmetics, how this game mode would definitely not have aged well. But it really was just added into the game to make sure they fulfilled that element from the roadmap, and unfortunately it was only available in customs. It wasn't really that good a mode, but it was nice to have. It was cool. It had different elements that you don't normally see in Siege gameplay, so it was good to have those bits. And of course it was an absolute hilarity to mess around with, and I could imagine something like this coming back for the 1v1 mode that they plan to add in this year. Because imagine something like this for the 1v1. It would be perfect. It would work beautifully for that system. But unfortunately, I don't think anything like this will come back in the future. Now, before we jump into more unique game modes for Rainbow Six Siege, let's have a little chat about the arcade playlist. So this is a dedicated place to now go and play the arcade. It used to be that arcade would show up for like a long weekend and then disappear potentially forever, as we've seen with previous game modes we've talked about. And the original promise with this arcade playlist was that they would be available all the time and that they would periodically change the actual game modes that were available. I think since this was implemented, it's changed once. And at this moment in time when I record this video, it is Weapon Roulette, Free For All, Deathmatch, Snipers Only, and Golden Gun. If you're watching this video in a couple of years' time, let me know in the comments below if it has actually changed. And I honestly do hope that the arcade playlist does come back into the forefront at some point in the future, because we've seen that there is game modes that are quite interesting and unique, And I really would just love to see more unique stuff like this. And it's the same for events. Events have now become mostly reuses with very few new ones. And again, I would just love to see that kind of stuff come back to the forefront and have like 2 events per season, one a reuse and one a new one, and then an arcade playlist on top of that, because that would be wonderful. But of course, we are nowhere near that kind of content these days. Now we'll end this video with 3 arcade game modes that are a little bit more than they appear to be. Now of course in Rainbow Six Siege at one point we had events. We even sometimes had 2 per season, and then we also had arcade game modes that would get slotted in as well. And of course these arcade game modes would usually be pretty simple. But there was some that really stood out, and the first one is Legacy. This was actually almost a full-on event. It could have easily been a full-on event if they added in packs that were like old school rainbow uniforms or something. I would have 100% seen this as a really good full-on event. And what Legacy was it was the original roster of operators from the launch of the game with their original loadouts. However, some of them definitely were not correct, but it was a cool mode to play nonetheless, and it was also on old school maps as well, unmodified. In this arcade game mode, I loved so much that it actually appeared in my events video, even though it's not technically an event. Then we also had, believe it or not, Rainbow is Magic. This came back as an arcade game mode, and it was pretty decent to have as an arcade game mode. This is where the arcade playlist we see in the current game right now could really be made a lot more interesting just by having these things rotate in and out. Then we had Showdown, which was a full-on event, 3v3, wonderful. I don't know if it would really be as good these days with like mouse and keyboard on console and such, because back then it wasn't nearly as the problem it is today. And the fact that it was very hard to aim with these one-shot weapons was absolutely hilarious when you were battling out. I don't think you'd have quite the same atmosphere today with Showdown, although I would certainly love to see it return either way. But these 3 events, which did appear as arcade playlists at one point with Legacy, Rainbow's Magic and Showdown, were all excellent, and it is a pity they don't rotate in and out of the current arcade playlist that we have in game. Now, most likely you've probably noticed that I've been putting out a lot of what I would consider to be member-berry content, and I see it as probably being quite evergreen as well, as in that'll get lots of views on YouTube over a long period of time, whereas most of my news content is like a week at best. And of course, this is because it's a reflection of what I am thinking. The content I'm making is based on what I'm thinking. And I look at the events and the arcade playlist, and I think there's so much potential for the current arcade playlist to be cooler in Siege, like chuck Grand Larceny into it every so often, Rainbow is Magic every so often, and all the other cool modes that we just don't get to play anymore, which obviously do exist, and I would hope would be able to be repackaged in a way that they could just rotate it in and out of arcade regularly. And then also, I feel like the first couple of years of Siege were pretty bad because, of course, we had just the standard game modes and that was it. Then we had Outbreak, which started off all the limited time events, and then we had arcade playlists that got added in. And it feels like we're dropping off, of course, over the last couple of years, where we now get just reused events, and we usually get 1 per year, and the arcade playlist doesn't get updated. And I just want to see way more game modes, especially just bring back the ones that already exist, and of course bring new ones in. Not to mention there was the Mute Protocol event, which was basically gun game, so I'd love to see that added in and to the arcade playlist as well. And again, just to see that constantly cycle in the arcade playlist to make it far more interesting, and hopefully reach another golden age of Siege someday where we get new events, at least 1 per season every single season. And I do hope one day we get another co-op event, kind of like Outbreak, but preferably not zombies. And that would be my top-notch thing. If we could get into a point where we get some really cool co-op content someday for events, I'd be super happy, but that probably unfortunately won't happen ever. But anyway guys, let me know what you think of these game modes that you may never have played, and you could also check out the video on all the events as well. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you next time.